Hi, it's Kim Boon. Let's talk about Singapore's big transport dream, going car light. That's the idea that one day most of us won't need to drive. We'll walk, cycle, take the MRT, or use shared rides, and the city will be better for it. Less congestion, cleaner air, and more space for people. So today, I'm looking at one piece of that puzzle, the Land Transport Authority's upcoming ban on bicycles on pedestrian-only footpaths. So what sounds like a minor rule change could have major implications from 1st of July. For delivery riders, it's about livelihood. For the rest of us, it's about safety, mobility, and how far we have come in building a cycling-friendly city. And big thanks to Gold winner 6139 from our RDP community for suggesting this topic. I was also inspired by Mr. Jackson Now from the Workers' Party.
Ordinary people like you and I, we can contribute. We can make a difference, and we can build a better Singapore. This belief is what first drew me to the Workers' Party. To stop being a keyboard warrior and become the change I want to see.
You know, some people say we look alike, and when I look at this video, I'm starting to see the resemblance. Anyways, I was inspired to actually leave the house for this one, and I went down to Pasir Ris to see the reality for myself. And here's how this former keyboard warrior is doing it. I'm taking you on a first-hand journey through Pasir Ris, what a cyclist might experience navigating the area. Along the way, I'll walk you through the details of the ban, share a few observations, and wrap up with some of my own reflections. And when I refer to cyclists, I'm mainly referring to Grab riders because for them this is about livelihood and safety. But much of what I'll say applies to anyone using a bicycle as part of active mobility. So I started just across the road from Pasir Ris Mall, but before we roll out, let me explain why I chose Pasir Ris. There's a 136-page walking and cycling design guide published by the LTA. We'll dive into some of its details later, but for now, here's the big picture. Under the National Cycling Plan, the government plans to complete a 700 km dedicated cycling network by 2030. According to the map updated in November 2018, Pasir Ris intra-town cycling network was either completed or under construction at the time. So that was 6 or 7 years ago. By now, it's fair to assume much of it is done, so Pasir Ris gives us a good test case to see how this vision has played out. So this is a common sight for cyclists heading to the west side of Pasir Ris, a pedestrian footpath next to a cycling lane. So LTA's guideline says footpaths should be 1.5 meters wide, cycling paths 2 meters. Now, why 2 meters? Why not 1.5 or 2.5? Turns out LTA did the math. They factored in the width of bicycles, natural deviations during rides, and all the technical things. And that's how they concluded that 2 meters is the minimum for two cyclists to pass each other safely. I'm a simpler guy. I believe it when I see it, and here in Pasir Ris, I saw it. And yeah, 2 meters works. So there was some construction, so I had to detour through some HDB blocks. Ahead, I spotted a bus stop just in front of Block 570, so perfect time to talk about pedestrian priority zones or PPZs. So these zones behind bus stops are known conflict areas between cyclists and pedestrians. The recommended width here is 3.5 meters to accommodate both groups. Oh, and notice those yellow strips on the path. Those are speed regulating strips, visual cues that are meant to slow riders down. So they are about 3 mm thick, not enough to trip pedestrians or throw off cyclists, but just enough to act as a gentle warning. So let's move along Pasir Ris Drive 1 and cross towards the 500 series HDB blocks. The footpath and cycling paths here are still distinct, meeting LTA guidelines. So as this lady on the left walks past, let's bring up the new rules. Since August 2024, LTA announced that bicycles and non-motorized PMDs will be banned from footpaths where there's already a cycling path. So there's a 1-year grace period, and enforcement kicks in from July 1st this year. And penalties includes a fine up to $2,000, 3 months jail or both. Yet you can see that many cyclists don't seem to distinguish clearly between the two paths. That tells me that there's still a gap in education, and yes, early enforcement might be necessary to reinforce this change. That's it, some riders do know the rules. Okay, let's pause at this bus stop. Remember the one near Block 570 earlier? It had ample space behind it, enough to accommodate both cyclists and pedestrians. This one though is just 1.9 meters wide, 10 cm shy, and not really a big deal unless you factor in some of the blind spots that could lead to accidents. But the bigger issue, Singapore was built for cars, and that's why our road network is world class. But our planners also knew that not everyone drives, and that's why we got sideways and covered walkways almost everywhere, which is great for walking. And as someone who walks a lot, I'll say this: Singapore has done a great job in supporting a walkable city. Now, if only we could do something about the weather. Okay, anyways, the real challenge, cycling came into the picture much later. So instead of carving out road space for bike lanes, we squeezed in cycling paths from sideways and green strips. But these spaces were already optimized for walking, so how much more can we really squeeze? If we're serious about cycling as part of active mobility, then we need proper infrastructure, exactly what LTA has laid out in its design guidelines. Right now, trying to fit both cyclists and pedestrian into limited space feels like a safety hazard. Again, notice how some cyclists are still on pedestrian-only paths. But let's also talk about pedestrians on cycling lanes. Under the new rules, pedestrians can still walk on both paths. They're just encouraged to stick to theirs. So if a pedestrian is on a bike lane, cyclists will either have to wait behind or try to maneuver around them. And that's how tensions build. Another issue, inconsistent path widths. Here the cycling lane is just 1.7 to 1.8 meters long, not quite the 2 meter standard. Again, it shows the challenge of retrofitting walking infrastructure for cycling. Now we're on Elias Road. Check out the fading path markings. It's a sign that we need a better long-term solution. Maybe it's time we rethink and consider dedicated road lanes for cyclists. Also, did you notice the repainted cyclist logo? There's a story behind that. LTA designed it to depict an upright cyclist, reminding us that riders should slow down, stay alert, and keep their heads up. Subtle but effective. Okay, back to our walk. We have seen several bus stops now. This one on Elias Road is especially problematic. The cycling path ends a few meters before the bus stop, leaving the rider to figure it out. Usually, cyclists are meant to pass behind the bus stops, but here, the space is just 1.1 meters wide, tight for a shared zone. Or maybe they're supposed to go in the front, but that space is 2 meters, not much better. And here's the issue, there's no consistency. Sometimes cyclists go behind, sometimes in front, other times you just improvise. But if you're trying to keep people safe, figure it out isn't really policy. Now we're approaching Pasir Ris Drive 3, you'll see another issue. In areas originally designed only for walking, there's often no space left for cycling paths, so cyclists are expected to dismount and push. That's not ideal, especially for delivery riders working under the sun trying to make ends meet. So this stretch by View 8 residents shows what I mean. A 1.5 meter footpath meant for pedestrians is now being shared with cyclists too. The tension this can cause is obvious. And despite efforts to build cycling paths, many gaps remain. The 2030 plan promises 700 km of tracks, but Singapore has over 9,500 km of roads, more than 10 times. I also spoke to some riders where cycling paths don't exist, they're forced onto the road, sharing space with vehicles going more than twice their speed. Think about it. On pathways, cyclists tailgates pedestrians. On roads, heavy vehicles tailgate cyclists. It's not just stressful, it's dangerous. To make it worse, many cyclists aren't familiar with road rules. Unlike drivers, they don't take theory tests. Expecting them to ride safely alongside vehicles without training is risky for them and others. And at this point, I want to zoom out beyond Pasir Ris for a bit and look at it at a national level. I also did a walk around Chinatown area yesterday, and based on LTA's map, bike paths for this area appears to be planned for the future. However, just looking at these existing pathways, I don't think it will be feasible or practical to have any form of cycling paths. Therefore, cyclists almost surely must be on the road, which is why more has to be done to ensure their safety. Is it time for us to consider carving out some asphalt and have dedicated cycling lanes on the road? So here's yet another bus stop along Pasir Ris Drive 3 where the rail space isn't sufficient. Same story. And here's a lane with a sub 2 meter width, again due to infrastructure constraints. Here we are quite near to Pasir Ris Mall. You may have noticed that cycling paths sometimes end abruptly, and riders aren't always sure what to do next. Often they continue on footpaths that aren't explicitly restricted, but those are only 1.5 meters wide and meant for pedestrians. Those choke points are usually near busy landmarks, increasing the risk of conflict. Sure, riders could go on the road, but sometimes that means taking a long detour just to reach a nearby destination, and that breaks the whole idea of active mobility being direct and seamless. Anyways, that was quite a walk, and the heat, let's not go there. Let's recap. On straight and low traffic stretches, the infrastructure generally holds up. Cycling and walking paths are well laid out and follow LTA guidelines. Second, where the traffic intensifies, especially at bus stops, the design gets inconsistent. Widths drop below spec, signs are unclear, and there's no uniform rule for navigating around bus stops. Third, many stretches, especially older ones, lack any dedicated bike lanes, and most were clearly built with only pedestrians in mind. And number 4, that then leads to cyclists often being pushed onto roads, but with lower speeds, limited training, and hostile traffic, that's not just inefficient, it's unsafe. Now let's talk about human cost. Many cyclists are delivery riders who rely on bikes to earn a living. These rule changes could severely affect their ability to work safely and efficiently. Yes, more cycling tracks will help, but they won't fix the fundamental problem that we need to rethink how cities support bikes as a mode of transport. Maybe it's time we learn from Amsterdam, Zurich, or even the Netherlands, where cyclists aren't just tolerated, they're prioritized. So if we really want a car-like society, we can't just talk about it. We got to build it for everyone. Should we build this from an already limited pathway meant for pedestrians? Or can we consider carving out from the asphalt side of the equation and dedicate a cycling lane for our cyclists? Ultimately, we have to decide what kind of city we want to live in. One where cyclists feels like intruders, or one where they're part of the future. Anyways, thanks for walking with me today, literally. If you've got some stories or frustration about getting around Singapore, drop them in the comments and I'd love to hear from you. Till next time, stay safe, stay kind, and I'll see you in the next episode of our Red Dot Perspective.